I think one thing that's really important is how we imagine the world, how we create some of the reality that we live in by imagining it. This phenomenon of the social imaginary gives us not just some topics that we talk about, but the very way we talk, the way we think of the world. So how do people from one part of the world conceptualize other parts of the world? Do we think of humanity as a whole lot of individual people, or do we think about the kind of connections that we make in our countries or even in our families and our cities? The social imaginary is a force that shapes even before we have made conscious decisions about how to act. For example, do we believe that business corporations are real and materially exist? Well, how? They don't have a physical existence necessarily. They have a kind of legal existence and a financial existence, and we culturally accept them. So they're not completely different from the world of religion and talking about what exists in the way of values in the world or of basic commitments of faith. Or politics, the way we understand what it is to settle things by voting or by discussion. Conflicts between Muslims and non-Muslims, between different groups of Muslims, Shiites, Sunni, different groups of Christians, Catholics, Protestants, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Orthodox. Each of these is a product of the way in which the world has been imagined, the way in which the solidarity of people within groups has been shaped by that imagining. And it's been made historically real. To say that it's a product of imagination doesn't mean that it's just easily changed, but it does mean that it can be changed, that we can imagine it a different way. We can begin to think a different way and make a different reality. One of the things we have to recognize is that we may have a concept and say, democracy, that's the most important thing. But it's not the only thing in the world, and it may not be the concept that other people use to orient themselves in the world. It's a Western concept. We may think it refers to Greece. We may think it should translate immediately to every country. But even inside Europe, we can see very quickly that the model of democracy doesn't apply universally. It's not so obvious. I think what's important is for people to have conversations, but that means not just one side listening to the other. It means an engagement that goes in 2 ways, or 10 ways, or 100 ways with different voices. And this is a problem not only of making decisions, like having a vote and deciding should we raise the taxes. It's a problem of achieving understanding. How do we come to some real understanding? Who even is this we? The way in which a group of people comes to say we is a process of sharing, of mutual understanding, of common culture, of common history, but also of distinctions from other people whom they see as different or outside. The idea of nation is part of a social imaginary, part of a way of imagining reality, but it becomes very powerful. To say that it depends on how we imagine reality doesn't mean that it's not real. It means that the reality is one that depends on culture, and it depends on repetition and practical use. It depends on how we think about it and how we talk about it. One of the things we saw in the Arab Spring was that there were huge crowds in Cairo representing Egyptian people. But when the voting came a few months later, people in some of the rural areas voted in a different way from the people in Cairo. They had different ideas of Islam, different ideas of democracy, different ideas of the nation, different economic problems, different resentments, different aspirations. All of those things go into a process like democracy. So voting is a good thing, but it may be something that is best done when there's already relative peace, when there is already the rule of law, when institutions are well formed. We have to consider that there are multiple goods. Or again, in the current world system, economic factors and financial factors are creating a great deal of upheaval. If we look just inside Europe at the situation in Greece or Spain or Italy, I think that we need some humility when we talk about the goals of democracy. I personally share the idea that we want to be democratic, that democracy is a good aspiration, but I worry when people use democracy as a term to be proud about themselves and insult other people. The idea of democracy should not be taken as a sort of tool in a conflict, but should be a shared aspiration of working together. To work together requires that we talk together, that we relate to each other, but it doesn't require that we are all best friends. Democracy is about relations among strangers. Public life in general, the life of citizens, the life that people share in the world in social movements, worried about the environment or worried about global inequality. This requires that we get along with strangers. And shared relationships among strangers are different from family or friends. For there to be large-scale democracy or world peace or effective work on economic questions requires us to be able to work with strangers, with people we don't know personally, who are very different from us in some important ways like language or religion, and yet who also inhabit the same world and share the same sorts of concerns. We can find commonalities. If we respect each other, we are each willing to consider what the other says and possibly be changed by it. We are each willing to look at things through the eyes of the other person. And this, it seems to me, is crucial.